Thanks very much. I know it's a commitment in an evening, and that's why I did say to Mark, it's good to start on time and it's good to finish on time. So we'll certainly do that. Um, but as Mark said, I've got a passion for this whole area, and in my eyes, it's a fairly critical aspect of our life as Christians. And also, it's very good for our association members, especially leaders. But you don't have to be a leader if you're a member of our association, but also in your workplaces. The skills and I suppose the disposition and the attitude and the approach that comes with accompaniment is really significant, I think, in terms of connecting with each other as Christians, really, in our faith journey together. So, hence the subtitle "Journey into Journeying Together." Probably all of you have had some type of experience, perhaps of accompaniment in one way or another. It might have been accidental. It might have been just very, very focused, perhaps in some cases. They could have been informal conversations which were a type of accompaniment because of the nature of what took place in that. Um, or it could have been something that you very formally follow up in your life. Some people do have spiritual accompaniment with somebody who's trained, but I'm sure all of us at different points have had experiences of this. And really, this is an attempt to try to help us understand this whole area of accompaniment. And for me, the area of accompaniment very well sinks in with synodality, the whole sense of movement that we've got in our church. And I will say something more about that as we go through. It is at the heart of what our movement is in the church, and I think it's quite a significant movement. And I'm sure that at different points you've come across the possibility of having synodal conversations or spiritual conversations in some ways in various, either in parishes, in local association groups, or even in the workplace. One of the things that the brothers have is a rule of life. There's a tradition in monastic traditions of having a rule of life, and it was one of the things that we had many years ago. And then we had our own constitutions, which sort of try to state who we are. But we thought it was important to have another more inspirational document, and we call it Wherever You Go. And this rule of life tries to set out something of what's at the heart of who we are as brothers. And I thought it was just as relevant to any person who's Christian, Catholic, who's leading a faith-filled life. This particular quote is relevant. Um, at the very beginning, in Article 1, it encourages us to take on the attitude of a pilgrim each day. And to me, that's at the heart of this whole thing. Pilgrims are open to the experience. When pilgrims go onto their pilgrimage, while they have a sense of where they're heading, in some ways, and perhaps other people have walked the journey before them, there's a whole element of the experience which they don't know about. They know that they could be guided by the Spirit, and some people are very conscious of that, other people less so, but they don't really know where this is going to take them. And I think that's part of the excitement of this whole experience of a some type of pilgrimage. And of course, it's been very relevant in recent years with various people going off to pilgrimages right around the world in various parts, actually. So to me, I heard a quote only today, actually, which I thought was rather relevant, and I'll just mention it now. Um, you make the path by walking it. So in terms of our journey as an individual in our faith journey, you make the path by walking it. And of course, this is a great metaphor for what we're doing. And so I just put that before you at the beginning. I ask you that as you join this group for the next 3 weeks, you do have the heart of a pilgrim. And I would encourage you to continue to reflect on some of the things that I will put to you outside of the group time. In my mind, it's a period of about a month where we're putting a focus on a particular area, but I'm hoping that you can take some of what we've discussed and some of what I've put to you, and reflect on it and see how it applies to your own life. So that's the sense that I'm asking, and to bring an openness to it. And I'm assuming by you choosing it, by responding to the invitation, you're here off your own bat, that you are open to the experience. And it's not, from my point of view, just about giving you information. It is an experience, and it's asking you to open yourself to that. And I'm hoping that some of the things that I say might strike you and make you take them away and to think about how they apply to your own life. So within that spirit, we join with each other. What are the aims of the program? In very broad terms, the aims of the program are to enable you to walk alongside each other as you deepen your spiritual conversations. There's no doubt that deepening our spiritual conversations seems to be one of the things that I think, certainly in the association and certainly in all of what the movement is across the church, it is about deepening our conversations, our spiritual conversations. That seems to be the trend, and it's not just a trend for itself and in and of itself, but it seems to be a call of the Spirit at this point in time, and so that's what we want to try to help you do. Part of that goes down to sharpening your listening skills as you accompany others, as and in your accompaniment of others, and also to listen to yourself as part of that. And to me, that's critical in this. And one of the things I also try to integrate into everything that I do is that this can invite you to some type of personal transformational growth in your own faith journey. I hope that you can take something away, aside from anything to do with accompaniment, which makes you reflect on your own faith journey. And so it's an experience um, as we go through. I wanted to start by putting some ideas to you, I suppose, underpinnings or things that to me are just basic um, foundation stones of where I'm coming from as I speak to you. I love this quote from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He said it many, many years ago, but it remains relevant to this very point. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And he was an interesting character because he was a paleontologist, he was a Jesuit priest, he was a war correspondent in the First World War. So he had seen some pretty tough elements of life. And but he was regarded in the end as a mystic. And this is his quote: "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." That all of us are united, whether we know it or not, and whether we consciously follow our faith or not, we are all spiritual beings. Everybody is. And that's, to me, is a key foundation point for or assumption that I make in my presentation. Some years ago, when I was at St. Augustine's in Cairns, I left there about 8 years ago now, which has gone very quickly. But in that school, we had some wonderful young people, as all of our schools have. And one day, one of the Year 12 students came and saw me, and he gave me a book. And the book is called Proof of Heaven: A Neurosurgeon's Journey into the Afterlife by Eben Alexander, an American doctor. And I was fascinated by this. This is a boy that I didn't teach, I didn't coach, and basically had little or nothing to do with on a day-to-day basis, apart from just saying hello to in the corridor. And I was the principal of the school, and perhaps he'd heard me speak at certain types of assemblies or other occasions where I often spoke about our spiritual life in simple terms that the students can relate to. And he said to me that, oh, on Saturday I was in a bookshop and I was looking for a book for my mother or whatever, and I saw this book and I thought of you. And so I thought I'd buy it and give it to you. It was a curious thing to do. No other student ever did that, probably in my entire teaching career. But here he comes along and gives it to me. And it was a fascinating story. And I wanted to say something about this because it gives an insight into consciousness. This particular book is the story of Eben Alexander, who is a neurosurgeon, and he worked in the United States. Um, he one night started, or one, sorry, one morning he was about to go off to work, but before he got out of bed, he started to feel quite ill. And he eventually tried to get up and have a shave and get himself ready for the day. And he had a series of operations lined up for the day. But one of the interesting things that happened was this very quickly, his health started to degenerate significantly. His wife was there with him, and she noticed that he had to go back to bed, which he never did. He was very active in the morning, got up early and went off to work, loved his work, obviously very stressful in some ways. But this day, he went back to the bed and slowly over time, he eventually started to lose consciousness. And so naturally, his wife called the ambulance and they took him to the hospital that he worked at, which was a local hospital. And the people that treated him were his own people, the people that he worked closest with, because after some initial analysis, they decided that it was really a neurological problem and they wanted to do some work on him. And they monitored him over a period of time. And over this course of time, they decided that he started to degenerate significantly even further, despite what they were doing, to the point where they put him on life support. All the while not really being able to explain fully what this was about, or pinpoint what was happening for him. And in the course of several hours, he started to lose his life really. And they actually eventually declared him brain dead. So the people that he worked with, the neuroscientists that he worked with, declared him brain dead. And that was a significant fact, which I'll come back to in a moment. But over the course of several days, they kept him on life support in the hope that something might happen, and partly in the end to enable his family from around the country to come and say goodbye to him because it was such a shocking event. What was interesting was with the treatment that they gave, and which they weren't sure about. There was a lot of uncertainties about this, and he remained brain dead, and they declared him brain dead, as I said. He eventually, within about 7 or 8 days, eventually regained consciousness. So it was an extraordinary sort of set of circumstances. And of course, an experience such as this had a huge impact on him as a person. And he's now well. He recovered over a number of months. It took a long time for him to fully recover. But it was such a significant experience, he decided to put it into words and he wrote this book. And it was really his story of that journey that he went on. And he tells a story of basically going to heaven in his mind. And he was visited by people who he would regard as relatives, even. So it was an experience of heaven. It was more than a near-death experience. It was beyond that. And obviously, talking about something like this can raise a whole myriad of questions for people. And I don't want to go down that path here today. But the point I want to make was he was of the Catholic faith. He had essentially given up his faith for many years. And he said, one of the reasons that I gave up my faith was by becoming a neurosurgeon, I had lived in a world which was essentially scientific. I pinned everything on the science that we did. I didn't really believe too much beyond the science. And he said, if anything, I moved further away from the church and my own faith and didn't really think about God or anything like that. So he had a huge sort of conversion through this experience, as you can imagine. But he said the one thing that's striking about the experience is here I was as a neurosurgeon. I believe that all consciousness existed in my brain, physically in my brain. And if I was to be declared brain dead, then there would be no awareness of anything. And yet, during that whole period of being brain dead, he tells the story of a journey that he goes on. And he can tell it in really vivid imagery. So he said the biggest discovery for me, the conversion experience was to realize that there is a God, but it was the fact that there's a consciousness beyond my brain. There's something bigger out there that goes well beyond my physical brain. And he said, that is such a shift for me, so much so that I wanted to tell the world about it. And of course, now, he's now on the circuit and giving various workshops because he's wanting to tell this story. He did write a subsequent book, which I've also read. After writing this, he then had thousands of people write to him to tell their story of their near death experiences and various types of conversions that they had. As I say, I don't want to go into that now. It's not the point of today. But I do want to say something about the whole area of consciousness. If anything, it highlights the fact that there is a consciousness in our world, in nature, in ourselves, within our hearts and souls, which take us well beyond anything that we would normally be conscious of. There is an intelligence out there at a greater depth and a greater breadth than we can imagine. And that's at the heart of what his story is about. And so I wanted to highlight that tonight for a few reasons. Uh, the development of accompaniment skills is increased awareness, but also for us to have the confidence that there is a whole story happening well beyond our awareness. And I want to say something about this very thing, and it's fascinating. I'm telling you this because I have spoke about Eben Alexander in other contexts, and one of the things that I realized, it's funny, realized later on, was that I was actually part of this very story in a sense. This young man in year 12, for some reason, some mysterious reason, and at the time I didn't really put a lot of thought into this, came and gave me a book. And this book actually was a book that I needed to read at the time. There was something about this book, apart from what I've just said, there was other elements about this book that I needed to read for my own spiritual life at this point in time. And here I am, part of a bigger story. This boy would not have that consciousness, not be aware of what he was doing necessarily, but just knew that this was important to me and would be something that I might like to read. So, in a sense, that bigger consciousness was very active. And it really is part of what accompaniment is. Accompaniment is about us working together, accompanying other people, accompanying each other to help us to understand and see things that are happening that we wouldn't always see because there is a bigger spiritual life. So it's about paying attention. And I say all we need to do, it's not such an easy thing necessarily, but all we need to do is pay attention and notice what's happening. We need to do it within ourselves, and the more aware of we are of what that is in ourselves, the more capable we will be of helping other people do it. So there's no way out of this. This is a personal journey. So you can't sort of just help somebody else. It has to happen through you as well. So you're caught up in the journey on a personal level and on a spiritual level or a faith level. So all you need to do is to pay attention and notice what's happening. So paying attention and noticing are key words when it comes to any type of accompaniment. And the companion, if you like, the person that's accompanying another person, assists us to see what's happening. And I'm sure that's why I say I'm sure most people sitting here have probably had a conversation where they've had an insight or had a deep conversation with somebody where there was usually elements of great openness, where you got taken to a point which you wouldn't normally go in terms of depth or breadth of the conversation. And it was something that sort of marked you, something that stayed with you. And it's probably something that you may even be able to remember at this moment. So, conversations which have an impact because it does involve openness, it does involve a couple of people, or in some cases, it could even involve a group, but often a one-to-one sharing where something significant happens, where there's elements of vulnerability. Vulnerability is normally a facet of this as well. And something happens where you get an insight. But one of the things as a company is, and this is what I would encourage you to do, is to take the time to notice more carefully what's happening. And I hope that one of the outcomes of this time together is it does sharpen that for you. Today, I've just added, I literally came up to do this presentation and I added this slide only an hour ago. Why did I do that? Today we had a lecture. I'm presently at the annual conference of Catholic Religious Australia, which are the Catholic leaders, so the provincials and leaders of various religious groups around the country, Catholic religious groups. It's the peak body. But today we had Tony Banks, who's an Augustinian, speak to us. Now, you may have seen Tony in recent times because Tony just happens to be one of Pope Leo's best friends, or Bob, as he calls him. And they asked him to speak to us both today and tomorrow as part of an ongoing discussion that we're having, a way of getting to understand the thinking of Pope Leo, which is a continuation of Pope Francis, of course. And he gave us some insights into the man because he worked closely with him for many years in Rome when he was the leader of the Augustinians. And Tony is presently the leader of the Augustinians in Australia. But one of the things that he said, Pope Leo, or Bob as he calls him, was very strong about in recent years as a leader of the Augustinians and has now started to evolve this in his own thinking, are these dimensions that he used to say to the Augustinians, there are two dimensions to our life, and he's not just talking about a religious group, but he's talking about the Christian life. There are two dimensions that are absolutely essential. Interiority, in other words, cultivating your inner life, cultivating your prayer life, your silence, the inner life that you have, that we all have. And I love the quote that St. Augustine's said here, do not go outside of yourself, return to yourself. Truth dwells in the inner person. This is where we find a source of truth. But he was saying that the other side of it is the truth is sort of tested and confirmed in community. And for me, this is really significant for us in terms of the Marist Association as groups around the country, because really we have to have both of these. And so our communion or our chance to talk to each other, our conversations together as pilgrims, if you like, is so important in community. But of course, unless you have the interiority, there's something missing as well. And so these two are two halves of the one whole. And of course, I just note at the bottom there that this is really very aligned to the whole concept of synodality. That as St. Augustine also said, community is a group of friends seeking God. That we're seeking God together, and we can help each other to do that by sharing something of our own faith. And during these periods of these next few weeks, I hope I can give you some ideas to sharpen your capacity to do that um, in your various roles. So I just thought that was really interesting that that came up today, and I thought it was worth mentioning tonight. What I'm going to ask us to do now is to move into a period of prayer, but this is a bit of a different prayer. This is a visual prayer. It's a silent prayer, just done through imagery. And I've just, over a period of time, accumulated a number of photographs, which I think are provocative and evocative, which get us to think about our lives. And at the end of this, I'm going to ask you, and I want you to be aware as you're having the experience, I want you to be aware of what's happening to you. So I'm asking you to attune yourself or to notice what's happening inside you. And this to me gets back to the interiority. What's happening inside you as you look at these images? There might be a particular image that grabs you in some way. What sensation or reactions did you notice in your body? We sometimes forget about that. We're actually having a bodily experience often with these things. And so I ultimately get back to the key question, what was arising within you? So at the end of this, I will ask you these questions and give you a period of reflection. And then I'll ask you to have 10 minutes having a discussion together in the smaller groups, just to share something of this. What does this require us to do? And I want to emphasize this. When you see these images, and I choose images because I don't want you to be analytical. Please don't try and analyze it. Please don't try and go after the ideas that should be arising within you. Just let it naturally evolve. Just let something, and so the sense of arising within, it's out of your control. Don't try and control it. Just be open to the experience. And you might go through the whole experience, and it could be the very last slide that speaks to you. So you might look at several of them and think, oh, that means nothing to me, or that's not significant for me, or I don't know what that means. Don't try and work out what it means. Just let the image, as it were, speak to you. Just be like that pilgrim, be open, and see what happens for yourself. So within that spirit that I say that, and of course I use the expression "staying in the now." This is the this is the ability to stay right in the now, not to be too analytical, not to be too much in our heads, but just allowing what's in our whole body, what our feelings are, what our body is feeling like. It's a whole body experience. So that's the key question. So we'll move into a period of prayer, a period of silence, and I'll just put these images up for you to look at. As I say, don't go after the meaning. Let whatever needs to come to you at this moment. And so I just take you back to those three questions. But the key question really is what is arising within you? The others are just leading to that. Let's just stay with that for a moment. And if something is arising within you, just stay with it. Don't think about it too much. Just let it take you somewhere. So we'll have another couple of minutes of silence. And so now there's an opportunity for us to break into those breakout groups for just a short time, 10 minutes, but they're only breakout groups of about 5 people. So everyone has a couple of minutes to say something. And I would encourage you to have a conversation which is where you give each person an opportunity just to say something and say what is arising within you and at whatever level you feel comfortable with in sharing that. And not to break into interactive conversation until everybody's had the opportunity to just say something. So I'll leave that to you, just around that question about what's arising within you, or whatever you want to talk about. Just let it happen. There's no right or wrong answer. So I'll hand over to whoever's got the controls
I've
to
got it, Darren.
press the buttons.
Okay. Thanks, Darren. And thanks to each group has a leader. We'll just get the conversation moving. But as you said, Darren's explained it, and we'll see you back in the main room in 10 minutes or so.
Thanks, Mark.
I think,
I might join one of those.
yeah, do you want to, I'll just put you in,
Well, I can go into three.
three's got,
There's only got 3 people. I can just join it from here.
yeah, okay.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Still in your car, Megan?
Yes.
You
Um,
must have a, do you have a
I
long
just
trip home?
I just stopped. I've got rugby training, so I've been driving there and I'm now in the car park waiting.
Uh, rug-
Running a busy schedule over here.
Rugby training. I love it.
Mm. So anyway, thanks, guys.
I'll mute myself again now.
We can't proceed because the oh, there he is. Looking for you there. I lost you for a moment, Darren.
Oh no, that's okay. We're
We're
ready
we're
to.
we're all back, Darren.
Okay. All right. I'm just trying to get back into the. It's always tricky when you try to go back in after this. Okay.
I thought the other one was you, haha.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Okay. So hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
Is that coming up again now?
Yep. All good.
Okay, good. Thanks. Well, hopefully that was just a chance to explore a few elements of that with each other. And one of the challenges I'd give you, and I'll come back to this at the end, is just to and this is true of the whole presentation, to see what stays with you after it all. Could be sometimes what somebody else said, not what you saw. Um, that just gives you food for thought, because we're always God is always trying to communicate with us in some way. Okay, well, let's keep moving. I'll put a couple of other thoughts to you. Um, you will hear me say this a fair bit, but the whole thing about the space between people, or the space that happens um, in accompaniment, is rather significant. And I'll come back to, in the next session, I will go into this in a deeper sort of way about some of the skills. And one of the skills of an accompanier or of someone is to hold a space, to be able to hold a space for somebody else to actually reflect, to hold an emotional or a psychological, spiritual space that allows them to actually unfold a story. But I'll come back to that more in detail next time. But one of the things that I think happens is that something special happens in the space between two people, or even in the space in a group, which is a sort of which I'm sure we can all relate to. It's a dynamic. And sometimes this can just happen quite spontaneously. Sometimes we give people opportunities for that to happen in sort of set environments, like a retreat or other sorts of things, or a time of prayer together or whatever. But the space between, it's the dynamic that happens between two people, which is bigger than the sum of the two people. There's something beyond. And if we go back to that whole thing about the consciousness, and there's a bigger intelligibility, there's an intelligence there beyond us, there's God beyond us. There's something special about that. Um, and I think as somebody that accompanies somebody, how you enter the space becomes rather important. Um, Etc. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story. I told this story. I made a speech at the end of the MSA conference, and probably a handful of you were at the MSA conference, and it was done in a different context. But I told a story about my own experience of entering a space with one of my students. One of my parts of my former life was to work at the John Burns School at Lewisham, which you may or may not be aware is a school for kids with behaviour problems, and they're kids that are asked to leave mainstream schooling. and to come to a sort of a special environment, a special school environment, with about 45 or 50 students and a very high staff ratio. Um, Nevertheless, there's a story that sort of stays with me from my experience. I'll just retell this story very briefly. But one morning I was sitting there, and I can remember this as clear as anything. And it's over 15 years ago that this happened. But I was sitting there one morning, and I was looking out. I was writing a letter, and I was looking out the office window, and I had a vision. I could see who was coming through the school gate as they walked in. And some days that was interesting observation because some of our students had real anger problems, or they were bringing stuff from home and they'd had a fight with somebody or whatever. But on this occasion, I was sitting there, and this was about the third morning that I noticed a fairly new student to the school coming in late. And of course, one of the things that we tried to get them to do was to be on time and follow these sorts of things up as you would in any school. Um, but I was sitting there looking out the window, and on this occasion, I felt motivated to go out and speak to him. And so I did. And as I walked out, I wasn't sure what I was going to say to him because, as the principal of the school and as an authority figure, if you like, or someone that wants to see things happening well for this student, I could easily have gone out and, chipped him about being late for the third time in a row, third day in a row. But for whatever reason, I entered the space in a different way. I said to him, how you going? Yeah. Um, are you hungry? Would you like something to eat? And we used to have a breakfast program. I knew there would have been some food left over, maybe some eggs and some toast and what have you. And he said immediately, jumped on that and said, "Yeah, I'm starving. I haven't eaten since last night." And so I said, "I will come around. I'll get you something to eat." So we sat and I had breakfast with him essentially as he sat there. Now, I'd never really, apart from the enrollment interview, I'd never had a long conversation with this young man. And he was 15 years of age. He'd had a complicated background, like they all did, but I just let him talk. And we talked about all sorts of things. And then slowly he started to unfold something of his life story. And this happened several times over the course of the next few months. He was often late. That was one of his little issues. But he was a good young man and he was trying to do the right thing and he turned up every day. But I just let him tell the story um, of his life. And it had a big impact on me personally because um, I started to really feel a sort of something inside myself about, and it was like a space within me that opened up as I just listened to him. It was sort of like an interior moment. I felt this sense of feeling something within inside myself that was echoing inside me, a space within me, but at the same time listening to him. And also in that sort of a presence of God. And he told a horrific story of, his father being burnt to death in a house fire that they had and all of these sorts of things. It was a graphic and horrible story. And the thing I didn't say the other night when I spoke to the group, but what was interesting about him was at one point I was fascinated by the fact that on one of these occasions, after many conversations that we'd had, I was sitting there and he was telling me for finally the nub of the story. He'd sort of the trust had built up, and I was listening to the real story, if you like, and it was a graphic story. It was a tough story. But as I listened to him, I noticed I became more and more calm. And this deep calmness developed within me. And it was like a space opening up inside me. But also at the same time, my heart was going out to him. So I was very aware of what was happening internally within me, aware of what was arising within, but at the same time listening intently to his story. So much so, and I was fascinated by this, he actually stopped at one point and actually said, "Well, you're very calm." And I said, "Well, I'm not the one telling the story. I'm just listening." And so he kept going. And about 10 minutes later, he goes, "Actually, you're very calm." It was a really interesting conversation to have with this kid. So he developed an awareness of me for whatever reason and gave me the feedback. And he was right. He was perfectly right. There was something about the space between us which just allowed him to tell his story. And it was very interesting. So it made me reflect later on about how I entered the space and how by his sharing, he had a big impact on me because I learned something about myself as a listener, and I had a whole lot of reflections that I'd learned something about. But one of the reflections I had was how I entered the space in the first place. And it was only later on that I thought, yeah, I went out there and I could have easily chipped him about being late, and that would have closed him down probably. And with these sorts of kids, someone needed to talk to them. And I just happened to be the person at the time. And that was the other thing about it. I had made a conscious decision that perhaps I was the person to talk to him in a way that no one else could. Um, and so I elected to go out there and I didn't know where it was going. So there was a vulnerability in that. I didn't have standard stock answers. I didn't know what he was going to tell me or where this story was going to head or what was going to happen between us. And there was a vulnerability in that. And I didn't have the usual teacher thing of the protection of, doing the right thing. It was a moment of humanity. It was a moment of me of both of us just sharing our humanity. It was just me being me, no roles. That was put aside, but it was a safe environment. It wasn't unsafe or anything like that. It was safe for him, and it was done in public. But it was an intimate sort of. There was an intimacy to the humanity of it. And so I suppose I use that as a story of, how we enter a space with somebody is very important. The other thing is, I do believe that every day or regularly, maybe not every day, but regularly, there are opportunities for us to enter the space where we could have a more significant conversation or a significant interaction with somebody. And we make a choice. We don't always choose to go there. Sometimes we can almost see that it's there when we don't go there because we don't want to, or we're not ready to ourselves. We don't want to take the risk. And other occasions, some of those situations just present themselves. Bang, they're just there, whether we like it or not. They hit us in the face. Um, so I think part of accompaniment is about allowing a space between yourself and another person to evolve and allow that dynamism, allow the conversation to go where it needs to go. And there is a vulnerability in that, but also to have the confidence that God's in this picture, that where it needs to go, it will go. It doesn't matter. I don't need to control it. So how you enter the space, the fact that you choose to enter the space, and also you need to cultivate the capacity to enter the space, I believe. And I'm sure that everybody here would have moments where you've had a moment, if you like, where you've had a significant thing happen, sometimes thrust upon you by circumstance, other times decisions that you had made with somebody else. And you may not have been talking about faith, but you could have been talking about something which really is at the heart of your relationship or the heart of life, something that's meaningful. And I think accompaniments about enabling meaningful conversations, which take it to another level. The very thing that people want to do, but often choose not to do because they're too scared, basically. So that's just something I wanted to highlight. Pope Francis said some of these words, and I thought I'd just finish with some of what he was he focused in August 2014. One of his comments, he said a lot of things about accompaniment at different points, but he made this comment: life is a long journey, but a journey that cannot be travelled alone. Rather, it must be travelled with our brothers and sisters in the presence of God. We are brothers and sisters. We journey as brothers and sisters. And so this is the whole sense of accompaniment is a very natural thing to be doing, but it's also a very, it is an intentional thing. And that's part of what I hope you hear me saying. He also talked about the sacred ground. We are on sacred ground, and the art of accompaniment, he calls it the art, and I think it is an art. The art of accompaniment teaches us to remove our sandals before the sacred ground of the other. That comes from the Joy of the Gospels. A beautiful phrase. The art of accompaniment teaches us to remove our sandals before the sacred ground of the other and really put our focus on the other. Um, to the word spiritual direction has often been used, or spiritual accompaniment, and so this is these two characters who are Jesuit priests have written a lot about the practice of accompaniment, and they make this comment that accompaniment enables that person, the other person, to pay attention to God's personal communication to him or her, to respond to this personally communicating God, and to live out of the consequence of the relationship. So it's enabling other people to notice, going back to that sense of paying attention and noticing God. Just like I was having the experience of noticing something of God within me as I was listening to that young boy. Um, Obviously, safety is also important. It is a safe, confidential space between people. That's usually a characteristic. You don't get people having a meaningful conversation too easily unless they feel safe with you, and it's a safe environment. So sometimes the actual physical environment can enable it as well. I mean, a lot of parents would know that they've probably had some very significant conversations with their son, particularly uh, in a car, not just son, but daughter as well. But for some reason, boys particularly respond to this, I think, in a car driving them somewhere where you're not looking at them. Girls don't mind that sort of eye-to-eye contact as much, but sometimes when boys are with somebody else, you can have some very meaningful conversation and you're not looking at them. But it's a safe space to be in. There's a space that's sort of set aside just for the two people. Um, Maureen Conroy has written a lot about this. A Mercy sister, an Australian Mercy, talks about accompaniment helps people grow in a personal relationship with God and assists them to discover God's presence in their life. That's if you're talking about spiritual accompaniment, but there's different types of accompaniment. Um, Another person I know quite well, a friend of mine who's done a lot of work in this space, um, I asked him to give me a quote one time after all of his experience of accompanying people over the years. And this is a direct quote from him, just off the cuff. He said, "The art of companioning, as he calls it, lies in our uncovering the obvious in our lives and in realizing that everyday events are the means by which God tries to reach us. God shows God's self in the bits and pieces of everyday life. Often we miss the cue. We fail to locate it in the ordinary, raw experiences of our lives. And part of what accompaniment does, part of what a deeper conversation can do, is to help people notice or pay attention to those things. I'll just let you read that again yourself. And just like I missed, if you go back to that boy that I was talking about at the beginning, who gave me the book, um, I missed the part about the fact that this was, yeah, he was giving me, there was a bigger story here, that he was giving me the book because I needed to read it. Um, and I needed to learn something from that experience. That there was, he didn't know he was being, I suppose, the conduit of the spirit. And I didn't recognize it at the time either. It was only later on, by reflecting on the experience, that I noticed something more significant. Oh, there's God in this. God's God's asking me to read this. There's some messages in here for me. So I need to read this more carefully. So it's just very interesting how these things happen. And of course, Carl Rogers, one of the great, and this is a quote from Hugh Mackay's book, The Kindness Revolution, where he quotes Carl Rogers, one of the great psychologists of the 20th century, talking about listening, really. But if you really understand another person, if you're willing to enter his or her private world and see the way life appears to him or her without any attempt to make evaluative judgments, you run the risk of being changed yourself. You might see it in his or her way. You might find yourself influenced in your attitudes. The risk of being changed is one of the most frightening prospects most of us can face. Very interesting comment from Carl Rogers. So that's why I say, when you accompany other people, you can't help but learn something about yourself. You have to take the risk. You're in it. You're in the picture. You're walking with the person. You're bringing yourself to the story as well. And you too will be changed. Just like I was. That's why I told that story. I was changed in some ways by that experience of that young fellow that I spent some time talking to. And I still remember it 15 years ago. It still stays with me. We'll unravel this a little bit more next week. The other way of putting it is you can say, and this is a very Buddhist thing to say, talking about witnessing, witnessing in the now. Um, and there's two parts to this: prayer, or our meditation, or our own silence, or our times of silence. Prayer is witnessing to and participating with the action of God now. Accompaniment is witnessing to the action of God in another person and assisting them to do this for themselves. Um, and so you sort of can't, you've got to do both. And you become better at doing the second one if you're doing the first. If you're spending some time to be aware of your own prayer in whatever way that is, whether that's in the course of your day where you just notice, have a moment where you just notice some silence, or you just have a moment where you look at a beautiful scene, where you look beyond uh, just the surface level, where you give yourself permission to do that, then you can help another person do the same. So the whole idea of witnessing, and of course, the count, Pope Francis talks about the culture of encounter, being there. And I want to use this as a way of one of the last things I say. But Pope Francis, I think his explanation's so good because it's so simple. You meet people where they're at. In other words, you don't set the agenda. You meet people where they're at. You presume the good in them and hope they do the same for you. You have a conversation. You open your heart and your mind, and you're prepared to learn something from them. And you go where they are going. You go where they are going. You allow the other person to take you on the journey. So you're very focused. That absolutely sums up in very simple language what accompaniment is really about. And I'll pick up elements of this next week. He also talks about a vision of compassion, that we gaze at others rather than glare at them. An interesting way of putting it. We gaze as though we're gazing at the Lord in a way, but we gaze in a different, with a different quality. And final couple of things I wanted to say to draw the presentation to a close tonight. The essence of accompaniment really comes down to our attitude, our approach, or if you like, our disposition. How do we bring ourselves into a place? And that becomes rather significant. So it's not just about skills, it's about our approach, it's about our attitude, about our disposition. And I want to finish with this last slide. I would encourage you to go back to these questions. These are questions that I didn't make up. They come from Richard Raw, really, or out of his tradition. When you have experiences in your life, what happened? What resonated with you or challenged you? What sensations did you notice in your body? And then the last question, which I haven't added before, is what is yours to do? In other words, does this cause you to want to take some action? You need to do something about this. It's so significant, you want to do something about it. So I leave you with that. I'll come back to that again, but I would encourage you to see what stays with you from this session over the course of the next couple of weeks before we meet again. So thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Good on you. Thanks very much, Brother Darren. Let's give him a virtual clap there. There you go.
Thank you.
We had, it's just briefly from me. Thanks so much. So it's in 2 weeks' time. I'll send out another reminder, but just pencil it in your calendars there. There's lots of claps coming through there.
Oh, thank you.
You've done a good job, Darren. The
Hearts as
18th,
well. Lovely.
on the 18th of August, but I'll send a reminder as we continue building the program. And we've had a good turn up from across the country, Darren. WA to Alice to Victoria, Brisbane, Canberra, Ayr, suburbs right across Sydney, Newcastle, and Sale. I think I've covered the whole gamut there of our Broad and Red Bend. Sorry there, David. We've got Forbes and so a really good turn up. So I really appreciate that. And I know Darren does too. And there'll be a bit of a summation at the end of this. I'm just making some notes, but just tonight, the opening up of this, helping us to see things, and this real concept of the personal journey that we're all on. Some of us are heading to dinner shortly. I know Darren is. I know people in the West have got dinner. And about paying attention, Mark Wolford. I just heard my wife come in from work at Marcellin College, and I can smell dinner, the aroma of dinner. So that's where I'm heading. So thanks very much, everyone, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good week or two.
Thanks, Darren.
See you later. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
See you.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Mark.
No worries. Thanks, Stuart. Good on you. Take care.
See you, Ruben. Sylvia.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Adios.
Okay.
There we go. See you, Mary. Cindy. See you, Brian.